She stood there every night, under the dim yellow lights of the old train station, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, waiting. People noticed her. Some whispered. Others avoided her. But nobody asked why. Because the truth was, nobody wanted to know. Nobody wanted to hear the answer to the question that everyone had in their heads. Who was she waiting for, and why hadn't he come yet? I remember the first night I saw her. It must have been sometime in late November, just as the cold started to bite. The air smelled like iron and wet leaves, and the mist hung low over the tracks. The station was nearly empty except for me, the bored ticket clerk behind the glass, and her. She wasn't moving around like the rest of us. She wasn't pacing, checking her phone, or glancing at the clock every 5 minutes. She was still, standing near the far bench, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes fixed on the tracks as if she expected something, or someone, to step right out of the dark. At first I thought she might be waiting for a delayed train. But she stayed after the last one came and went, and the station grew quiet again. She didn't budge. Even as the lights flickered and the wind whistled through the cracks in the old platform roof, she stayed. It wasn't until midnight, when the janitor came around, sweeping his broom along the tiles, that she finally turned and walked away. And even then she strolled like she was still giving someone time to catch up. The next night she came back. Same coat, same spot, same quiet stare into the distance. And the night after that. And the one after that. She wasn't just a passerby. She was there for a reason, though no one could figure out what it was. Now here's where it gets strange. People started talking. The station regulars, the night guards, the cleaning staff, the coffee stall guy, had theories. Some said she was waiting for a lover who'd promised to return but never did. Others claimed she was waiting for someone who had died, and she just hadn't accepted it yet. There were whispers that she wasn't right in the head, that she was sick, obsessed, or maybe even dangerous. And yet, night after night she came back. Always alone. Always waiting. I didn't mean to get involved at first. I mean, it wasn't my business. But curiosity can claw at you when something doesn't make sense. I found myself staying later after my shifts, pretending to check paperwork or count receipts, when in reality I was watching her. She studied the way she scanned the horizon, as if she could almost see a shadow moving toward her, even when there was nothing there. And then something happened, something I still can't explain. One night, after standing there for hours, I saw her lips move. She was whispering. It wasn't random either. Her words looked rehearsed, like she'd been saying them every night. I couldn't hear her over the hum of the vending machines and the occasional squeak of a rat in the corner, but I could see it. Her mouth formed the same shapes over and over again. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just waiting. This was a ritual. This was something she had to do. And I swear to you, the night he finally showed up, it didn't just shock her. It shocked every single person in that station. Because none of us expected him to look the way he did. None of us expected the story to be real. The thing about habits is that you start to notice them without even trying. By the second week, I could predict her exact routine down to the minute. She would arrive just before the 9:30 train from the city, the one most commuters used if they worked late shifts. She'd step onto the platform quietly, almost like she didn't want to disturb anyone, then take her place by the far bench. She never sat down, though the seat was always empty. She'd stand, hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes locked on the tracks like she was afraid she'd miss something if she even blinked. Her presence changed the atmosphere of the station. People grew uncomfortable around her. At first, passengers tried to ask if she needed help or was lost. But she'd always shake her head politely, mutter something they couldn't hear, and turn back toward the rails. After that, they stopped trying. The regulars gave her a wide berth. Even the janitor, who'd seen almost everything in that place, kept his distance. I couldn't explain why I cared so much. Maybe it was boredom or something else, like the nagging feeling that I was watching a story unfold and if I didn't pay attention I'd miss the ending. But I started digging. Not in a creepy way, at least that's what I told myself. I just asked around. The coffee stall guy, Raj, swore she'd been coming even before I noticed. Months, he told me one night, pouring hot water into a paper cup. Always the same time, always the same spot. Doesn't buy anything, doesn't bother anyone. Just waits. Like she's frozen in time. The security guard, a heavy-set man named Don, wasn't so charitable. She's trouble, he said. Mark my words, something's off about her. Normal people don't act like that. You'll see. Sooner or later, it'll blow up in someone's face. But there was one detail nobody could explain. She wasn't carrying a phone. Not once did I see her pull one out to check the time or scroll while she waited. In a world where everyone clung to their screens, she stood out. She wasn't distracted, wasn't trying to pass the time. She was fully there, focused like her entire existence was tied to that station. I wondered if she was waiting for someone who didn't even know she was there. Or worse, someone who couldn't possibly come back. One night, just as the last train screeched through, I gathered the courage to approach her. My heart was hammering and I felt ridiculous, like I was about to break some unspoken rule. But I had to know. "Excuse me," I said, my voice catching a little in the cold air. "Are you waiting for someone?" She turned to look at me. And I'll never forget her eyes. They weren't angry or startled, they were sad. Deeply sad. Like she was carrying years of weight behind them. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was so soft I almost didn't catch it. "But he's late." I didn't know what to say. He's late? That could mean anything. A delayed train, a broken promise, or something much darker. But before I could ask, the janitor's broom scraped across the tiles nearby, and she turned away from me, gaze snapping back to the tracks like I was no longer there. That was the last real exchange we had for weeks. But from that moment I was hooked. Because now it wasn't just curiosity, it was personal. I had heard her speak. I had seen the look in her eyes. And I knew with every fiber of my being that whoever she was waiting for wasn't just some ghost from her imagination. Something, or someone, was coming. And when he finally arrived, I realized why she'd been waiting all that time. After that short exchange, I couldn't get her words out of my head. "He's late." That was all she said, but it was enough to keep me awake at night. I kept replaying it, wondering who he was, why he was late, and why she still believed he was coming. People don't wait forever, not unless there's a reason strong enough to hold them there. The following nights, I started noticing more about her. The way she'd shift her weight slightly, like her feet hurt but she refused to sit down. The way her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall exactly at 10:15, as if she was checking whether someone had missed a connection. And the most haunting part, the whispering. Every night, around the same time, she'd start to move her lips, murmuring words only she could hear. It wasn't random either. I got close enough once to catch a fragment. Just 4 words, "I'll wait for you." It was the way she said it that got to me, not like a plea. Not like she was desperate. More like she was making a promise, a vow she refused to break. That's when I started asking more questions, this time outside the station. I figured someone had to know who she was. I wondered at the corner store down the road, at the diner where night shift workers went for coffee, even at the bar 2 blocks away. At first, people shrugged. But one old woman at the restaurant leaned in close and whispered like she was sharing a secret. "She's been waiting for years," she said, her voice low and scratchy. "Some say it started after the accident." I asked what accident, but she wouldn't elaborate. Just shook her head and went back to stirring her tea. That word, accident, clung to me. I tried to piece it together. Had her loved one been killed in a crash? Had a train derailed? Or maybe it wasn't about death at all. Perhaps he was still out there somewhere, unable to come back. The thing is, once you hear something like that, it's impossible to let it go. I started digging through old news archives. It wasn't easy, I had to scroll through years of reports. But then I found it. About 3 years back, there was a major collision near the station. 2 trains, one heading east and the other returning west, had slammed into each other on the tracks just outside town. Dozens were injured. Several were killed. And among the names listed, one stood out. Daniel Cross. Age 29. Something about the name clicked. I didn't know why, but I had stumbled on a missing puzzle piece. The next night, when she appeared again, I couldn't help myself. I blurted it out. "Do you know someone named Daniel Cross?" For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly she turned her head toward me. Her lips parted, and I swear her whole face seemed to shift, not with surprise, not with anger, but with something else. Recognition. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but the words were clear. "He promised he would come back." And that's when it hit me. She wasn't waiting for a stranger. She wasn't waiting for a train. She was waiting for Daniel. A man who, according to every report I'd read, had died 3 years ago in that wreck. I wanted to shake her, to tell her the truth, to make her understand that he was gone. But when I saw how her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall, I couldn't. Because deep down I realized something terrifying. What if she wasn't wrong? The thought haunted me. What if she wasn't wrong? It made no sense. The man's name was written in the accident report, listed under the confirmed dead. There were photographs of the wreck, of the mangled cars twisted like toys. Nobody could survive something like that. And yet, every night, she stood there as if she knew something none of us did. I tried to convince myself it was grief. People cling to hope in strange ways, I told myself. Maybe she couldn't accept the truth. Maybe Daniel Cross had been the love of her life, and losing him had broken her in a way she couldn't fix. That would explain the whispers, the late nights, the endless waiting. But then, little details began to chip away at that explanation. One night, around 11 o'clock, when the station was almost empty, I saw her stiffen suddenly, as though she had heard something the rest of us couldn't. Her head turned sharply, her eyes locking onto the far end of the platform. The hairs on my neck stood up because I had felt it too, a faint vibration under the concrete floor. But there was no train scheduled at that time. No headlights down the track. Nothing. She leaned forward, clutching the edge of the bench like she was about to step onto the rails. I rushed toward her, heart pounding, ready to pull her back if I had to. But before I could reach her, the vibration stopped. The air grew still again. And just like that, she straightened up, almost calm. "It's not him," she whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. Her voice, it chilled me. She wasn't disappointed. She wasn't surprised. She sounded like she was certain. It was as if she was expecting someone honest to arrive eventually, and she could tell the difference between false alarms and the actual moment. The scariest part? She looked right at me after saying it, as though she knew I had felt it too. After that, I couldn't let it go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there, frozen under the yellow lights, repeating those words, "I'll wait for you." And somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was right, that he wasn't gone. That somehow he would show up. But the rational part of my brain kept fighting back. Dead people don't just come back. That's not how the world works. And yet, the more I tried to cling to reason, the more things around me started to unravel. For example, the night I overheard the cleaners whispering to each other in the staff room. "Did you see it?" one of them said, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "At 10:30 last night. I swear I saw him standing between the cars." The other cleaner looked shaken too. "Don't say that. Don't even joke." "I'm not joking." Tall man, dark coat, just standing there. And then he was gone. I should have dismissed it as tired eyes, tricks of the light, or imagination. But then I remembered something. In one of the articles, Daniel Cross had been described as a tall man who always wore a long, dark coat. And just like that, the line between reality and madness started to blur. The woman wasn't crazy. At least, not in the way we thought. She wasn't waiting for a ghost out of delusion. She was waiting because she truly believed that one night, when the last train came through, Daniel would step off it. And I hate to admit this, but after what I saw that week, I started to believe it too. The more nights I spent at that station, the heavier the air felt. It was like the place itself had changed. The yellow lights that once just flickered from old wiring now seemed to hum, buzzing louder in the silence. The shadows stretched farther, darker, like they held something back just out of sight. And every time I saw her standing there, staring down the tracks, I felt the same pull she must have felt. That sense that something was coming, something you couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. I didn't tell anyone what I was feeling. How could I? Who would believe me if I said I thought I could sense someone who wasn't supposed to be alive anymore? Even Raj, the coffee stall guy who loved gossip, would have laughed me out of the station. But deep down I wasn't laughing. I was scared. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, bitterly cold night where your breath hangs thick in the air. I was on edge from the start because she arrived earlier than usual. Not at 9:30 like always, but just after 8 o'clock. That threw me. She didn't glance at the clock or the timetable board. She just walked straight to her spot, clutching something in her hands. At first I thought it was just gloves or a scarf. But when I moved closer, I saw it wasn't clothing. It was a photograph. An old one worn at the edges. She kept running her thumb across it like she feared the image would fade if she let go. I wanted to see who was in that picture but didn't dare ask. Around 10 o'clock, the station was almost empty except for us and a few stragglers. That's when it happened. The ground shook. Not a lot, just enough to make the vending machine rattle against the wall. The tracks began to hum. But there was no announcement. No train scheduled. The woman stiffened instantly, clutching the photograph to her chest. Her lips started moving, faster than usual. I strained to listen and caught it this time. "Daniel, I'm here. Daniel, I'm here." My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. And then, I swear to you, the faintest light appeared down the tracks. Not bright, not blinding, but just enough to look like headlights in the fog. I froze. It wasn't possible. There were no trains at that hour. The timetable was clear. Yet the light grew stronger, moving closer. The steel rails began to sing, vibrating under the weight of something massive bearing down. The woman didn't move. She was trembling, yes, but not out of fear, out of hope. And just as the glow began to spill across the platform, I heard footsteps. They weren't coming from the tracks. They were coming from the far end of the station, near the tunnel that led to the street, heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing against the tile. I turned my head and I wasn't the only one. The janitor stopped sweeping. Raj leaned halfway out of his stall, eyes wide. Even the two men waiting on the bench sat up straighter, watching. And then he appeared. A tall figure, broad shoulders, a long dark coat. His pace was slow, steady, as if he knew every pair of eyes was locked on him. The woman let out a sound, a choked gasp that was half sob, half laugh, and staggered forward, her hands shaking violently around the photograph. I couldn't breathe. Nobody could. Whether it was possible or not, whether logic could explain it or not, there was no denying what we were all seeing. Daniel Cross had finally shown up. Part 6. The silence in that station was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Usually, even at night, there's always some noise, the distant hum of the city, the buzz of the lights, the hiss of steam from the pipes. But in that moment, as the tall figure in the dark coat walked slowly toward us, it was dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone froze. Nobody breathed. The woman, though, she broke the stillness. She stumbled forward like her legs barely worked, clutching that photo to her chest so tightly I thought it might crumple into dust. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, cracking. It wasn't just a word but a prayer, a release of years of pain in a single breath. And he kept walking. Not toward the exit or the ticket booth, straight toward her. That's when I saw his face. Pale. Too pale. Not sickly, not weak, just wrong. Like someone had drained all the color out of him. His eyes were dark, deep, like pits that didn't reflect the light around him. And yet, when they locked onto hers, there was recognition. Real recognition. Every hair on my arm stood up. Because this wasn't just some random man who happened to look like Daniel Cross, he looked exactly like the photos I'd seen in the newspaper archives. Same jawline, same heavy brows, even the faint scar along his temple. It was him. The two men on the bench muttered, exchanging nervous looks. One of them actually stood up like he was ready to bolt. Raj, the coffee guy, backed into his stall, clutching the counter like he thought it would keep him safe. The janitor stopped sweeping altogether, broom hanging limp in his hand. Nobody moved closer. Nobody dared. Except her. She took one step, then another and another until she was right in front of him. Her hand shook violently as she reached out, like she was afraid he'd vanish the moment she touched him. But he didn't vanish. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there staring down at her. And when her fingers finally brushed against the sleeve of his coat, she let out a sob so raw it sent chills racing down my spine. She buried her face against his chest, clutching him, crying like her soul had been waiting for this single moment. And the strangest thing? He lifted his arm. Slowly, stiffly, but he lifted it, and rested it across her back, almost like an embrace. That's when the whispering started. It wasn't her this time. It was him. His lips moved, words spilling out too low to hear clearly, but the sound was there. I strained, trying to catch even one word, but it was like the air was swallowing his voice. The woman nodded furiously at whatever he said, clinging to him tighter. And then I realized, nobody else was moving. Nobody was interrupting. Nobody could even. We were all locked in place like our bodies had decided to root themselves to the ground. I wanted to look away, blink, or do something, but I couldn't. Finally he stopped whispering. Slowly he looked up. His gaze swept across the platform, across all of us. And when his eyes met mine, I felt ice in my veins. Because it wasn't just a look, it was a warning. Like he knew I'd been watching. Like he knew I'd been digging into his story. At that moment, I regretted everything I had ever asked about Daniel Cross. I don't think I've ever felt a look cut through me like his did. It wasn't anger, not precisely. It was more like possession. Like he was saying, this isn't your story. Stay out of it. My legs wobbled, and for a second I thought I would collapse right there by the ticket booth. The woman didn't notice. Her face was still buried in his coat, her sobs muffled against his chest. She kept whispering his name repeatedly, as if speaking it would keep him tethered in front of her. But here's what nobody could ignore. He hadn't walked in with a ticket. He hadn't stepped off a train. He had just appeared, walking from the end of the tunnel like he had always belonged there. And the smell. God, the smell. It hit me slowly at first, faint like damp metal. Then it grew sharper, stronger, until my stomach turned. It was the smell of rust. No, not rust. Blood. That coppery tang you never forget once you've smelled it. The janitor was the first to move. He backed away, muttering something like a prayer under his breath. The two men on the bench grabbed their bags and left without looking back. Even Raj quietly slid the shutter of his stall halfway down, his face pale as chalk. But me, I couldn't leave. I should have, but I couldn't because something inside me needed to see how this ended. Daniel finally spoke loud enough for all of us to hear. His voice was low, hoarse, almost like his throat had been crushed. But the words were clear. I told you I would come back. The woman's cry turned into laughter. Shaky, disbelieving but filled with relief. She held his face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I knew it. I knew you'd keep your promise. They stood there for what felt like forever, locked in each other's presence, and the rest of us watched from a distance like helpless spectators. And then, when I thought the night couldn't get any stranger, Daniel turned again. His eyes scanned the station, and this time he spoke not just to her, but to all of us. You should not be here. The words vibrated through the platform, the walls, and even the ground beneath my shoes. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a truth. And every part of me knew he was right. The woman didn't flinch, however. She clung to him harder, shaking her head. Don't listen to them. You're here now. That's all that matters. But the rest of us? We were breaking. You could see it in how Raj's hands shook as he tried to close his stall quietly. You could see it in the way the janitor kept crossing himself. You could feel it in the air, thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. Because whether Daniel Cross had stepped out of death or out of something worse, one thing was sure. He wasn't meant to be standing there. And he knew we all understood that. I don't know how long the silence lasted after he spoke. It could have been seconds, it could have been minutes. Time didn't feel right anymore. Every clock in that station kept ticking, but the air felt frozen, like none of us were meant to move until he decided. The woman was the only one who seemed free. She looked at him like he was a miracle, like the rest of us didn't exist. She smoothed the front of his coat with trembling hands, repeatedly whispering his name. Her voice cracked, tears smeared across his sleeve, but she didn't stop. I wanted to believe in that moment, I really did. To think that maybe love was strong enough to pull someone back from wherever he had gone. But the smell was still there, that metallic, suffocating smell. And the more I looked at him, the more I noticed the wrongness. His shoes left no sound on the tiles. His coat swayed slightly when he moved, but there was no draft. And his skin, God, his skin. It wasn't just pale. It looked stretched, thin, like parchment pulled too tightly over bone. The janitor couldn't take it anymore. He dropped his broom, the clatter echoing across the platform. Everyone flinched. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound, sharp and unnatural, like a predator catching movement in the dark. His eyes fixed on the janitor, who froze mid-step. And then Daniel smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't gentle. It was hollow. The kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. You stayed, Daniel rasped. Not to the janitor. Not to me. Not to anyone in particular. Just into the air, like the words were drifting back from someplace we couldn't see. The janitor bolted. He didn't even bother to grab his broom. He ran straight through the exit tunnel, his footsteps echoing until they vanished into the night. Raj muttered under his breath, slammed his shutter the rest of the way down, and disappeared into the back of his stall. That left me and her. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But my legs wouldn't work. I just stood there watching. The woman finally pulled back from him, her face glowing with a joy I couldn't understand. She held up the photograph in her hands. Look, she whispered. I kept it. Every night I brought it here for you. I knew you'd see it. I knew you'd find me. Daniel's eyes dropped to the picture. His smile faltered. For a second I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Not recognition. Not love. Something else. Something darker. But she didn't notice. She slipped her hand into his, fingers lacing with his stiff ones. Let's go home, she said softly. Let's go where you belong. And for the first time since he appeared, Daniel moved with purpose. He turned, leading her toward the far tunnel like he had entered. She followed without hesitation, clutching his hand, tears still streaking her cheeks. Every step they took made the air heavier, thicker, like the station walls were groaning under the weight of something they couldn't hold. And when they finally reached the mouth of the tunnel, Daniel stopped. Slowly he turned his head over his shoulder. His eyes found mine again. And this time I understood the warning in them. Don't follow. The sound of his voice wasn't just a sound. It was pressure. It pressed against my chest, forcing me to step back. It rattled in my skull like thunder. And then just like that they were gone. The tunnel swallowed them whole. After they disappeared into the tunnel, the station felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, like a piece of the place had been ripped out and dragged away with them. I stood there frozen for a long time, staring at the dark mouth of the tunnel, half expecting them to come back, half praying they wouldn't. When I finally forced myself to move, my legs felt weak, like I'd been standing in one spot for hours. I looked around, but there was no one left. The janitor had fled, Raj was hiding in his stall, and the two men from the bench were long gone. It was just me. Alone. Or at least that's what I wanted to believe. I strolled across the platform, each step echoing louder than it should have. My eyes darted to the tracks, benches and walls, anywhere but the tunnel. Because even without looking I could feel it. That lingering presence. Heavy, watchful, like the air itself remembered what had just happened. I thought about calling someone. The police maybe. But what would I even say? A dead man just walked through the train station? They'd laugh me off the phone. Or worse, they'd send someone to lock me up. So I went home. Or at least I tried to. The walk back felt endless. Every sound, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the distant honk of a car, the rustle of leaves, felt sharper, louder, more threatening. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene. Her tears, his pale face, his eyes locking onto mine. Don't follow. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes I saw him. Not alive, not dead, just there staring at me from the shadows. The next evening I almost didn't go back to the station. I told myself I'd stay home, that I'd had enough. But curiosity, or maybe something stronger, pulled me back. I had to know if she would return. When I arrived the place was buzzing. Not with trains or passengers but with whispers. The janitor wasn't there, but the morning staff had already started spreading stories. Someone claimed they'd seen a tall man and a woman walking down the street together at dawn, hand in hand. Someone else swore they'd heard crying coming from the tunnel, even though it was empty. Raj wouldn't even look at me. When I tried to ask him what he'd seen, he just shook his head, muttering, "Don't talk about it. Don't you dare talk about it." His hands trembled so badly he spilled half a cup of coffee into the sink. And as for the woman, she didn't come back. Not that night. Not the one after. Not ever again. But here's the thing that unsettles me most, the photograph. 3 days later, while sweeping near the far bench, one of the cleaners found it. A small, worn picture tucked under the seat like it had been left behind on purpose. I managed to get a look before they threw it away. It was of her and Daniel. Smiling. Happy. Standing in front of the very station where she had waited all those nights. And across the bottom, in faded ink, were 4 words scribbled in handwriting that didn't look like hers. Wait for me. Always. For weeks, the station didn't feel the same. People stopped waiting for trains late at night. The staff avoided the tunnel like it carried some kind of sickness. Even the air felt heavier, like it carried a memory no one wanted to talk about. But I couldn't let it go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment. Her hand in his face pale and hollow, and the way the two of them walked into the darkness like it was where they belonged. I started digging. I wanted to know the truth about Daniel. At first, it was little things, asking around, searching old news articles, even questioning Raj when he finally calmed down enough to speak again. And what I found made everything worse. Daniel had died 5 years ago. It was an accident. A late-night train had derailed just outside the city, and he was one of the victims. They even held a small memorial at the very station where she had been waiting all those nights. I found a grainy photo from the service, and there she was, standing in the crowd, her face pale and broken, clutching a framed picture of him to her chest. So why had I seen him? Why had everyone seen him? And then, just as I was starting to convince myself that it had been some cruel trick of the mind, I saw her again. Not at the station, not waiting on the platform, but on the other side of the street as I walked home one evening. She was different now. Her hair was loose, no longer neatly tied back. Her clothes looked older, faded, like she'd been wearing the same outfit for weeks. But what froze me in place was her face. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at me, her eyes wide, unblinking, as if she knew I'd uncovered the truth. And then, slowly, she raised her hand. Not in a wave. Not in a greeting. But in a silent gesture that sent chills crawling down my spine. She lifted her finger and pressed it against her lips. A warning. Don't tell anyone. I blinked and she was gone. I never saw her again after that. The station eventually went back to normal. Trains came and went, people hurried about their lives. But for me, nothing ever felt normal again. Because sometimes when I pass that place late at night, I swear I can still hear footsteps echoing down the tunnel. Slow, steady, like 2 people walking side by side. And every now and then, when the wind is just right, I hear a woman's voice. Faint, broken, carried across the platform like a whisper that wasn't meant for me. I waited, every night. I don't know if she finally found what she was looking for, or if she's still searching in some way I'll never understand. All I know is this: the day he showed up, nothing about that station or about me was ever the same again. And maybe the scariest part isn't what I saw, but the question that won't leave my head. What if love doesn't stop at death? What if it waits, patiently, forever? Please share, like, subscribe, and notifications if you enjoyed the video.